Hey guys, welcome back to an ADD Woman podcast. I'm Lacy Estelle, your host. And today's podcast, I want to talk about ADHD women and how we are in relationships. Now, I've done pieces in the past on toxic relationships with ADHD, and I think this does kind of go hand in hand with that. But this is going to primarily talk to you about maybe some mistakes that you might be making in your own relationship, mistakes I know I've made in the past as an ADHD woman, and things that I definitely attest to my ADHD playing a major role in my relationships. So let's go. Welcome to an ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy Estelle, writer of all things about ADHD parenting and being an ADHD mother on Mothering the Storm with Lacy Estelle at lacyestelle.com. Here on an ADD Woman podcast, we're going to switch it up and talk about all things to do with ADHD as an adult woman and how we deal with it. Now, you might be thinking, ADHD, women don't really have that. Actually, we do. We've all just been doing such a great job for years of masking it. So let's dive in. So first and foremost, I want to just say that this list is probably going to sound really daunting. And when you think about having any mental illness and what it brings to a relationship, a lot of times there's a lot more cons than there are pros, right? So, if you're in a relationship with somebody who's depressed, it can be really difficult sometimes just because, they're in a state of mind that they can't just think their way out of. A lot of times they'll need some sort of medical intervention or just in general to find something that gives them the stimulation that they're needing. But overall, they say in every relationship, there's a lot of hills and valleys. And sometimes when you're dealing with somebody who has a mental illness, it feels like there is a lot more valleys than there are hills. But keep in mind that I will get to some really great things about being in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD, things that anybody who is in a relationship with someone who has ADHD can try to really lean on and feel like, yeah, at least they do that. Even when I'm at my wit's end with these other issues that they struggle with, you have to know that, like I said in the previous episode of this podcast, ADHD people, and especially us ADHD women, we have the best of intentions, but oftentimes we miss the mark. And it's not because we're not trying, and it's not because we don't want to. It just comes down to the way our brain is wired. So one of the first things I'm going to talk about is if you are an ADHD woman and you're in a relationship, you might find yourself starting arguments for no real reason. Now, sometimes you might recognize when you start to do this. It can be a simple tone change. Your spouse or your partner says something to you and you react defensively. That will start the argument. Sometimes it's perceiving the way that your partner is acting towards you, even though your perception is totally off. So we talked in previous episodes about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I think as an ADHD woman in a relationship, that can come into play a lot. Only because sometimes you'll have perceived rejection from your partner and they're just having a bad day. But you'll feel the need to pick an argument about it just for the sake that you need to get to the bottom of it or you need something to come of it, right? I think I also find this a lot. If you grew up in a household where there was always a lot of yelling or there was a lot of fighting between, maybe your parents or, your parents' relationships, and you get into a relationship and things are good, some part of your brain from the trauma in your history, and I think this definitely comes out more if you have ADHD too. Not 100% sure why, but I do find that women who have ADHD and also have trauma in their history, if their trauma is related to conflicts in the home, they'll get into a relationship and feel the need to have conflicts. So they'll feel like, if we don't fight, do we really love each other? Or if we don't fight, then we don't make up, then do we really love each other? And it's just not true. There are definitely ways in any relationship that you can have discussions, regardless of the mental differences that you have. You can find ways to have less conflict in your home and recognize when you're doing something just because your ADHD is holding the reins and you're not holding the reins. Try to mitigate that as minimal as possible. For a while, I got to a point where the only days that I would pick a fight with my now husband was literally the day before my period. And he made the mistake of one time asking me what day of the month it was. And I was like, You don't get to say that. I don't care what day of the month it is. You're still making me mad. And always, almost always, the next day I'd be like, I'm sorry. So even though sometimes this is going to happen, sometimes you're going to pick these fights. Your mood is cranky, you're crabby, you're moody, you're hormonal, whatever it is. And you just can't really control the way you're feeling. You can't get a hold of it really. And it's going to come out, it's going to happen. But you do want to try to minimize these opportunities as much as possible. So you really want to ask yourself, next time you're having a fight with your spouse, why are we having this fight? Are we having this fight because I felt something wasn't being met? Or are we having this fight because my spouse feels like something's not being met, or your partner? And at the bottom of it, what am I seeking out of this fight? Am I seeking that my spouse would see things my way exactly? Or am I seeking some sort of compromise that we both can sacrifice a little bit, but sacrifice a little less? Now, people will tell you, and I haven't been married for very long, so I don't know if I can speak to this or not, but people will say, when you care more about your marriage or your relationship than you care about being right, things get easier. And I can say, at least for me, now granted, I'm a newlywed. I would say I'm still a newlywed. We've been married for a year, but I would say that's true. I care a lot less about being right with my husband, and I care more about making sure that he knows I love him and I care about him. If that means that sometimes I have to sacrifice my wants immediately at that time, I sacrifice them. Now, this doesn't always work 110%, but I will say that you will grow a lot if you will allow yourself to sometimes just feel feelings that you would rather reject, but then move past them and recognize sometimes that those feelings are just lying to you. So a few other things that you might be prone to doing in your relationships, if you have ADHD, especially if you have unchecked ADHD, you're unaware of it, is you're going to impulsively lie to your partner or your spouse out of fear of rejection. Sometimes you'll spew the lie and then you'll immediately be like, why did I even lie about that? Like, I didn't need to lie about that. And it'll be something like, hey, did you remember to call the bank today? Yeah, I called them. I left them a message. And in your heart of hearts, you did not call them. And you're just telling them this lie because you're fearful that they're going to be mad at you for not calling or disappointed with you. It is an impulsive reaction that it's hard, especially if you're unmedicated or if you're not treating your ADHD in any shape or form. It's hard to have that momentary pause to tell yourself, don't lie. Because that's literally like what happens. Your brain, I think, just kind of goes into panic mode and you just spew out whatever small lie you want to say. And then, but what happens is if you have ADHD for any length of time and you recognize this symptom, because you probably did it to your boss or you probably did it to other people, right? And what comes out later is the lie spirals. It doesn't always, it's small. Okay. So you didn't actually call the bank. You told him you did. And then the following day, he's like, did the bank call you back? Now you have two choices. You totally forgot to call the bank again. So you can either own up to it and say, oh, you know what? I think I forgot to call them. I'll just call them right now. And then you look stupid and you look like a silly liar because then he says something like, I thought you said you called him. Yeah, but I don't think I actually did. And I don't know why I lied about it and I'm sorry. Well, then what else do you lie about? You know what I'm saying? Like it can spur on issues that you didn't even anticipate having. And you will tell yourself over and over again, oh, it's just a small little thing. It's just a small little lie. It's not a big deal. But compounding that lie with other things, you're eventually going to run into some sort of problems. So how do you stop doing that? You have to find a way to be mindful of it. You have to find a way to recognize that panic feeling when it sets in, when they ask you those questions and put you on the spot, and make yourself take a moment to respond. One of the best things I ever figured out how to do with my kids. Now, this does not have to do necessarily with lying, but it does have to do with reactions. My kids, if you are listening to this and you have kids, if you have ADHD, your kids know how to get under your skin like nobody's business. And as much as you will tell yourself that you want to be a cool, calm, collective parent, that everything's going to be good, man, you'll find yourself flying off the handle at something silly. Like my son would be like, hey, can I have some mac and cheese for snack? And I'm like, we don't have any mac and cheese right now. I'll make you a sandwich. I don't want a sandwich. I really want mac and cheese. Can't you just make some mac and cheese? I just really want mac and cheese. We really don't have mac and cheese right now. I'll make you a sandwich. Now, I've gotten really good recent years of being a broken record. So I can continue to say it just like that, no matter how much he pushes and pushes and pushes. And sometimes at some point I will stop and I will look at him and I will say, I'm not going to give you a different answer. That's the answer that I have for you. What kind of sandwich do you want? He'll groan and he'll walk away, fine, peanut butter and jelly, whatever. But in years past, sometimes he would poke and poke and poke at me. And I would finally be like, what is wrong with you? Why do you act like that? Stop it. And then we're in an argument. And, that is exactly how when your child has ADHD and they're dopamine seeking and you have ADHD and you're not keeping it in check, just blows up in your face. So when you impulsively lie or you impulsively act, in any sort of relationship, a lot of times it's never good. The other things you'll do in a relationship if your ADHD is unchecked is not only will you impulsively act, but you want to set up good boundaries with people that don't have your relationship best interest at heart. And I've seen this happen time and again. ADHD people in relationships, they get to a coasting point with the relationship's going good, and they get bored. And they start seeking that dopamine again. They want that fresh, new love, lust sort of feeling. And instead of learning to find happiness and contentment within that peaceful portion of the relationship where everything can just kind of coast, because you know each other well, things are going good, they do something silly and they start seeking attention on social media for, maybe for their body or for just in general. They send a DM to somebody that they have no business sending a DM to. They get a response on Snapchat from somebody that watched their story. And next thing you know, they're having full-blown conversations and I don't even think we always notice we're doing it, but especially if you're a woman and you have always associated your body and your sexuality as what gives you self-worth, you will be prone to doing this. It's important to make this distinction because your body and your sexuality and what you offer in the bedroom to your partner, your spouse, is not what gives you self-worth. And getting that kind of attention from somebody that's other than your partner or your spouse just causes pain. It causes pain for everybody around. Eventually, either you have to reject the person that is giving you the attention. That's painful for them because here they are thinking that maybe you're going to leave your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever. It causes pain for your spouse or your partner who finds out. Internally, it causes you pain because you recognize that you're doing something that you don't actually want to do, but you don't know how to stop. And I will tell you that the fastest way to stop is to just stop. Start ignoring the person that you were trying to get attention from, delete their messages. Like, it is not like, how do they say this? There's some sort of saying that's like, the best way to get off a slippery slope is to just get off of it. I don't think that's a saying, but basically if you're on your way down, like, jump off. Don't just keep going until you see how fast it can blow up, because it will eventually blow up on you. This is definitely something that you have to be aware of yourself in your relationships. Me and my husband, obviously we did premarital counseling. We did all sorts of different things, and we still have long talks about mistakes we've made in previous relationships, things that we would never do to each other because we know the kind of pain they caused. But we also know that we have not hit any points in our relationship where we question. I don't have any doubt that I didn't marry the right person. I've been told by several people that someday that will happen to me. I think when that does happen to me, my hope is that I recognize it. And my other thought would be, I'm going to try to surround myself with women who have been married way longer than I have and who have been through that drought already, who can look at me and say, you'll get past it. Keep going. Don't make any mistakes. Don't let your feelings rule your life. When you have ADHD as a woman, we are so in touch with our emotions and we're so in touch with our feelings that we can very easily allow our emotions to tell us what's going on in our life and whether what's going on in our life is right or wrong. If we feel a certain way about it, then we feel like it's got to be wrong, right? But that's not always the case. So sometimes your feelings lie to you. And I know that in this day and age, that is just not the societal norm. Everybody says your feelings are valid. Yes, I think everybody's feelings are valid and they should be talked about and dealt with. But then you have, for me as a Christian woman, I have my feelings and then I have how to measure my feelings against truth. So I'm constantly trying to take inventory of, okay, this is what I'm feeling, but what is the truth? If I feel rejected by my husband and I worry that it has to do with my body or it has to do with, and maybe on some level it does. Maybe he is rejecting me sexually because of how I look. This is just so you know, if my husband is listening, that is not the case at all. But I just felt the need to make this distinction because I do feel like this is what a lot of women deal with. You start to question what ends up happening is not only do you start to think to yourself, well, you need to be more. Oh, I need to lose weight, or I need to look different, or I need to change the way I look, or I need to change this, or I need to try to do this for him or do that for him. First of all, you have to go back to the basics and look at, okay, here's what I'm feeling. What does God say about who I am? What does God say about where my worth comes from? Does my worth come from my partner's satisfaction of me? Or does my worth come from God? And if my marriage's happiness hinges entirely on how I'm feeling, well, then how do I change what I'm feeling? And if I can't change my spouse, because you can't change your spouse, you can't change your partner, you have to focus on you. You have to live in a reactive state where you can only control how you react to the things that they do. So feel the feeling, feel the rejection, and then ask yourself, okay, what can I do that will help me to not need that sort of satisfaction from my partner or from my spouse to feel good about myself? When you get to that point, you start to really have to dig deep and ask yourself things like, wow, why do I rely on my spouse's want of me to give me self-worth? So is it easy to do? No, it's not. Because you definitely get into a relationship because you have this mutual attraction and you enjoy things about each other. And when sometimes you've learned almost everything you can about the other person, some of that mystery starts to fade away and you're underneath to the next layer of the person and you start to kind of go, gosh, I really don't like that about them. I really don't like that about them. But there is something that says that just because you don't act a certain way or don't do things the right way all the time, it doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. So coming back to things that, things that you will do in a relationship, you're going to forget dates. You're going to forget things that are important to you, that are important to your spouse. And it's going to make you seem like you don't care about your spouse. And this kind of comes back to what I was just saying, where you know, as well as I know, that your forgetfulness is not a measure of your character. You're not a careless person. You don't not care about your spouse. You care deeply about them. But for some reason, you just have a brain that doesn't always allow you to remember important things. I mean, and you can even tell your spouse this. Listen, I can't even remember where I set my keys down at. And if I could just make my brain remember those types of things, my life would be a lot easier. So please don't take it personal when I forgot, that this was the first place you told me you love me. Or, it's not that moment wasn't important to me. It was. My brain just doesn't really let me choose what I remember and instead lets me forget really important things. So you're going to forget things like that. And that can put an unnecessary burden on your spouse. And they will get frustrated with you. They'll feel like they're always the one having to remember things. They're always the one with carrying the mental load. Now, as a woman, I think that we tend to be the ones that carry the mental load more so. But when you have ADHD, a lot of times, if you are like me and you have inattentive ADHD, I gravitated to a spouse that I knew would help me carry that mental load. So, he comes home and he does ask me things like, did you call the bank today? And that's important. But I always do worry that he'll resent me for it at some point. But I think that's when you have to give yourself a reality check that just because you have these faults that you need to have your spouse look past does not mean that they don't have faults that you have to look past as well. So if you also have untreated ADHD and then you also struggle with like substance abuse disorder, or you've had major trauma in your past, you could be really prone to developing some borderline personality trait issues. Now, like I say in a lot of podcasts, I'm not a doctor. So this is a theory of mine. I've read some studies that do say that there is some sort of link. Borderline personality disorder seems to be, kind of looks like ADHD on steroids, if you ask me. You're extremely prone to rejection. You're super concerned about abandonment, and you tend to self-harm, which kind of comes into the impulsive issues. But you also have something where you'll have like a love-hate stream of where a lot of people will be like, well, maybe they're bipolar. Well, bipolar issues usually have manic and depressive. So people will go through manic episodes and then they swing down and they go into these depressed episodes. And most of that is all internalized. When you are dealing with somebody who has borderline, instead of it being manic and then depressed, you actually feel like you have more of the waves of like love, hate. I love you, I hate you. I love you, I hate you. I love you, I hate you. In relationships, this will come out by being extremely verbally abusive, emotionally abusive. You won't respect boundaries. You'll be prone to a lot of really toxic relationship things. You'll feel like you need to control the other person, and relationships are not about control. They're about mutual respect. So if that feels like you and you're telling yourself, maybe that is me, but I'm not going to go deal with it, well, that's to your own peril, I guess. One thing I also find is that a lot of people who have borderline personality disorder and untreated ADHD, at the point that they're at, once the personality traits have set in, they're not going to listen to anybody. They may pretend like they're going to listen, but they're not. They're just very, very good at manipulating. If you're listening to this podcast and you're listening because you're hoping that it will give you some sort of insight as to how you can change your relationship, and maybe as you go on, you're starting to realize that maybe it's not you so much that needs the help changing your relationship, and maybe it's the person that you're with, I strongly recommend getting help, talking to somebody. Verbal abuse, emotional abuse is extremely damaging. And a lot of times it is followed by physical abuse, even in ways that you can't imagine. A lot of times people will say, well, never hit me, that they've never hit me, so I don't think it was abuse. We can walk through that. I would love to talk to you more about that and see if I can help shed some light on some pretty dark places. Okay, so enough with the sad stuff and the burdensome stuff. Here's some really awesome reasons why being in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD is awesome. We are hyper empathetic. Now, for us, sometimes this sucks. And I mean that because we feel everybody's pain on a whole new level, and it is very all-encompassing sometimes. But the great part is that because we're so sensitive to that, we're really, really good at like, if we know you, we really know you. And we want to be intimately friends with you, even more so than just being in a relationship. I mean, I tell my husband all the time that I just love talking to him. And now I feel like most people feel like that in their relationship, especially if it's a good relationship, but I love just hearing his voice, and I love just knowing, what he went through each day, how he's feeling. And I don't necessarily know that you get that from just anybody else, because I feel like that's something that as an ADHD person, and maybe that's just because right now he's still my hyper focus, I'm crazy about him. But even still, I feel like, if you are with somebody who has ADHD and you can go to them and you can say, I'm feeling like this. And we are going to like immediately take it onto ourselves and be like, oh no, okay, we have to fix this because this feels really awful. That's a really great perk to being in a relationship with us. We will feel your feelings. We make things fun. We tend to be silly and goofy, especially behind closed doors. And not very many people usually will get to see that side of us, unless, of course, you're dealing with an extrovert who has ADHD. They do not care. They love the attention. That is how they are. But if you're dealing with somebody like me who is definitely an introvert but has ADHD, yes, I totally dance around the kitchen and I sing loudly and I do super silly things. But of course, I save them for everybody who's only in my home. So, but it's fun. It's fun to see me do that. I know my husband gets a chuckle out of it. He thinks that I'm cute, and it keeps everything lighthearted. So I would say too, if you are a woman with ADHD, we tend to know ourselves pretty well. And even though we don't always like to hear it, if you are a spouse, you care about us, and you can clearly see that we're allowing for our ADHD to just hold the reins and run the show. If you just give us some sort of gentle reminder, hey, I think that maybe you're struggling more than you're letting on. It seems like you're not as happy as you used to be, or it seems like you're having a really hard time. Maybe we should go talk to somebody. Once we get past feeling like that's a rejection, we will value it immensely, because a lot of times we know ourselves really, really well, but sometimes we can't see ourselves from an outsider's perspective. And If you care about us and you're willing to tell us something along those lines, ideally we should be willing to listen. And I would think that most of us would, and we'll heed that warning from you because it's important. So I would say that that goes hand in hand with us being pretty empathetic. We might have a hard time listening all the time, but when you really need us to listen, we will listen. A lot of times we also will not take traditional things personal, because this goes back to where I said you're going to forget important dates. Now, the lucky thing is that if you forget, if you're in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD and you're the one that forgets something, we're likely to go, that's okay, because we don't take those types of things personal. Sometimes we do, but a lot of times we try not to take those types of things personal because of the fact that we know ourselves that we're not perfect and that we are prone to forgetting. We're prone to being late. We're prone to, and we recognize that does not mean that you don't care. You forget our anniversary date or something. We might be like, well, that sucks, but that's okay. We can celebrate it in a couple days now that you know. I feel like most of us are like that. Some of us are probably like very hypocritical about it. Hopefully you grow past that. For me, I'm still working on it always. So I'm a late person. I know this about myself. I work really hard to not be late, and I have done a really good job of compacting that time. But this past Sunday, we were all getting ready for church. It was time to go, and my husband was still in bed. Now, this is unlike him. He is a very on-time person. So I was like, do I say something or don't I? Because we might be late. And our church has been doing communion, which is really important to me, at the very beginning of service. And I didn't want to miss it. And I was like, okay, Lacy, well, you do this a lot. You sit down when everybody's trying to rush out the door, or you decide that you have to go to the bathroom at the last minute and hold everybody up for 5 minutes. Or sometimes when your husband will say, you got to get out of bed, you'll be like, okay, I'll be up in 10 minutes, even though you need to leave in 15. So let's just keep your mouth shut and not worry about it and see where the chips fall. And you know what? We were still on time. He didn't come upstairs for a while. We got out the door later than I anticipated we would get out the door, but we still made it. And we got there in time to have communion, and all was right with the world. So, a lot of times we will do that. You don't see us doing that, but we will ask ourselves, okay, do I do this? If I do this, then I have to allow, if I do this and it's permissible, my husband does not nag me when I'm late. I think he knows that it wouldn't actually make me hurry. So he doesn't say anything to me. Because of that, I have to tell myself, I have to give him the same courtesy because I know that I would drag my feet too. So we don't take traditional things personal because most traditionally hurtful things, forgetting dates, being careless about the event that's going on that you need to get to, those types of things, because we just know that when we make mistakes like that, it's not a impression of our character. The other really awesome thing about us is we love really, really hard, sometimes to a fault. And I've talked about that in previous episodes, in toxic relationship episodes, where sometimes we do tend to be kind of codependent, which means that we try to emulate behavior. We try to act in certain ways to get a specific reaction from the person that we're with in an attempt to control them. And then we will put it on ourselves when that doesn't work. If that is the sort of pattern you're stuck in with your relationship, I would strongly recommend you talking to somebody. But at the core of that, even though control and love are not the same thing, usually that stems from our desire for the person that we're with to, live fully, to have joy. The problem just becomes is that in our mind, we tend to think that there's only one route to that, and it has to be the way that we want it to go. That can be destructive to your relationship. But if you found a way to know the type of partner that you should choose and the type of spouse you should choose, so that you are choosing somebody that you don't feel like you need to course correct all the time because they're already on their way on the road to happiness and joy. We love really hard. We love so hard that sometimes we can't even fathom it ourselves. Or we will look at the person that we're with and just feel so overwhelmed with how much we love them that, especially if you're a woman, you tend to cry. I do it all the time to my husband. He thinks I'm such a goof, but I just look at him and I'm just like, I just can't believe that I spent years without you and you're just like the perfect person for me. That is definitely a perk to being with us. So you can never say, if you've been in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD, you can never say that they didn't try really hard to be in a relationship with you, because I promise you they tried 10 times harder than you anticipated, especially if they loved you. So that's going to wrap up this episode, guys. I would love to hear from you. I would love for you to send me messages. Let's talk about anything you want to talk about. And I am still offering the mentorship program right now for only $15 a month. And I would love for you to get in, because right now we don't have very many members. So we're not actually doing it as a group. I'm still doing it one-on-one with everybody. So if you want in on something like that and you need somebody to talk to that's been in your shoes, I would love to do that with you and just come alongside you and help you in any way that I possibly can. I'm not an expert, but I absolutely would love to just chat with you, to have coffee, quote unquote, via Zoom and talk about, what you need. If you need some sort of direction in your life and you feel lost, hey, I've been there and let's get you found. So I hope you guys have a great week. I will talk to you soon. God bless. Bye.